The axe fell with a clean, percussive chunk that echoed in the cold morning air. Elias shifted his weight, his boots sinking slightly into the damp soil of the high meadow. He was 19 years old, and all he owned was this patch of land, a set of his father's tools, and the quiet, heavy dog watching him from the tree line. The dog, Boro, blinked his dark, intelligent eyes as the wood chips flew, a silent, constant witness. This was the first post, the beginning. It was a foundation piece for the lowest level of a structure that existed only in his mind and in the brittle, ink-filled pages of his father's journal. He measured the depth of the hole with a notched stick, 3 feet, exactly as the journal instructed. He worked through the day, a solitary rhythm of digging, cutting, and lifting. The sun climbed, burned weakly through the thin autumn clouds, and began its descent, casting long skeletal shadows from the pines. By dusk, he had set the 4 corner posts for the first, largest rectangle of the foundation. They looked small and absurd in the vastness of the clearing. Boro padded over, sniffed at the raw earth, and looked up at Elias as if to ask if this was all. Elias ran a hand over the dog's broad head, his fingers catching in the thick, dark fur. "It's a start," he said, his voice raspy from disuse. The next day, Mr. Abernathy rode by on his sturdy gray mare, reins held loosely in his gnarled hands. He'd farmed this valley for 50 years and believed he understood the unwritten laws of its weather, its soil, and its people. He pulled his horse to a stop, squinting at the 4 lonely posts. "What's this then, boy?" Abernathy's voice was not unkind, but it was heavy with the certainty of experience. "Bit of a large foundation for a woodshed, isn't it?" Elias straightened up from his work, wiping sweat from his brow with the back of a dirty glove. "It's the cabin," Abernathy chuckled, a dry, rustling sound. "The whole thing? Elias, that's the size of my barn's footprint. You'll never heat a space that big. The winter will eat you alive in a single-room box that size. Your father, God rest his soul, he knew how to build a tight, sensible house." "It's not 1 room," Elias said quietly. He didn't elaborate. Explaining was not his way. The work would have to do the explaining. "Well, what is it then?" Abernathy pressed, a hint of impatience entering his tone. "You can't live in a foundation. The snows will be here in a month, maybe less. The geese flew south 2 weeks early this year. That's a bad sign." "I have a plan," Elias said. Abernathy shook his head, gathering his reins. "A plan, famous last words. Don't be a fool, son. Your father left you that good, solid cabin down by the creek. Sell this high ground to Carver for the timber and fix up the old place. That's sense. This," he gestured with his chin at the 4 posts, "this is just foolish pride." He clicked his tongue, and the mare moved on, leaving Elias alone with his work and the weight of established wisdom. That night, by the light of a flickering lantern in the old, drafty cabin he was soon to abandon, Elias opened the journal. His father's handwriting was a precise, angular script. The ink faded to a soft brown. The page was titled, "The Principle of Stratified Heat." There was a detailed drawing of a structure that looked like a rough-hewn ziggurat, or a wide set of stairs climbing toward the sky. Each level was set back from the one below it, creating a series of tiered roofs. "The cold is heavy," his father had written. "It pools on the floor like water. Warmth is light. It rises like smoke." A conventional cabin fights this principle. It tries to heat the entire volume of a box, an endless battle against the cold sinking and the heat escaping. But what if the structure itself acknowledged this truth? a house built in layers. The lowest level, for storage, for the work of winter, can remain cold. The second level, for cooking and living, needs only moderate warmth. The highest, smallest level, for sleeping, captures the rising heat from all the work below. Each level a distinct stratum of temperature. A 9-degree variance between each floor if the central flue is built correctly. It is not about brute force, but about intelligent cooperation with the laws of nature. Elias traced the drawing with a calloused finger. He could see it. He could feel the logic of it in his bones. He closed the book. Mr. Abernathy was a good man, but he saw only the footprint. He couldn't see the shape of the idea that would rise from it. Boro rested his heavy head on Elias's knee, and together they stared into the low flames of the fire, the last fire they would have in this old, sensible house. The work was relentless. Weeks blurred into a cycle of labor that began before dawn and ended long after dusk. He felled the trees himself, choosing straight, thick pines from the north side of the slope, where the wood grew dense and strong against the prevailing winds. The rhythmic swing of the axe became the valley's heartbeat. Boro would lie at a safe distance, head on his paws, watching the trees fall, then rising to follow Elias as he and the old mule, Samson, dragged the logs to the building site. The air filled with the sharp, clean scent of fresh-cut pine. He notched the logs with a precision that was both inherited and self-taught. His father's diagrams showing him the geometry, his own hands learning the feel of the wood, the way a blade would bite and curl a perfect shaving. The first level rose slowly, a massive 20 by 30-foot rectangle of stacked timber. This would be the utility level for firewood storage, a workshop, and a cold cellar dug into the hillside it backed into. It had few windows, just thick walls designed to be a barrier against the earth's deep chill. Mr. Carver, who owned the lumber mill and most of the valley's debt, stopped his carriage one afternoon. He was a man whose body had grown soft from a life of counting other men's labor. He looked at the half-finished first level with a professional's disdain. "That's a waste of good timber, son," Carver said, not bothering to get down from his seat. "You've used enough wood there for 2 proper cabins, and your joinery, it's tight, I'll give you that. You could be making good money at the mill with hands like those instead of building whatever this monument to folly is." "I'm building my home," Elias replied, not pausing in his work of peeling bark from a new log. "A home is meant to keep you warm," Carver scoffed. "This thing is a wooden barn. It's an ice house. You'll be burning through a cord of wood a week just to keep from seeing your own breath. You'll be down at my mill by January, begging for scraps and credit." He shook his head and snapped the reins, the carriage rattling away down the rutted road. Elias laid the peeler down and ran his hand over the smooth, pale wood of the log. His palms were a geography of calluses, crisscrossed with small, healing cuts. His back ached with a deep, permanent fire. But the work was honest. The logs were true. The plan was sound. He trusted the journal more than he trusted the words of men who had never had to build their own shelter. Soon after, Mrs. Gable from the general store made the trek up the hill, her face etched with genuine concern. She carried a basket with a fresh loaf of bread, a wedge of cheese, and a small jar of her blackberry jam. "Elias, dear," she said, her voice soft. "Mr. Abernathy is worried sick. He says you won't listen to reason. Please, there's still time to winter-proof your father's old place. No one would think less of you." "Thank you for the bread, Mrs. Gable," Elias said, accepting the basket. He was truly grateful. "But this is my home now." She looked at the strange, massive wooden box he had built, then at the second, smaller foundation he was laying on top of its sturdy roof beams. But it looks like a staircase. It doesn't look like a house. The snow will just pile up on those lower roofs. The weight will crush it. The roofs are pitched steeply, he said, pointing. The snow will slide. It was another detail from the journal, a specific angle calculated to shed the heaviest of loads. She sighed, a small cloud in the cold air. I hope you're right, child. I truly do. She patted his arm, her touch light and motherly, before making her way back down the path, leaving him with the scent of fresh bread and the lingering chill of her doubt. As October bled into November, the second level took shape. It was 20 by 26 feet, set back from the front of the level below it, creating a wide, sheltered porch on the roof of the first floor. This would be the living space, with a large, south-facing window assembly he'd spent a week carefully crafting. He hauled flat stones from the creek bed, one by one, on a crude sledge pulled by Samson. These were for the great central chimney and hearth, the thermal core of the entire structure. It was a massive undertaking, a pillar of stone that would rise through all 3 levels of the house. He mortared it with a mixture of clay, sand, and ash, his fingers raw and stiff from the cold, wet work. It was during this time that Clara began to visit. She was Abernathy's daughter, quiet and observant like Elias, with a kindness that seemed to radiate from her like warmth from a stove. She never came with warnings or advice. Her first visit, she brought a bucket of fresh milk. Father says you're the stubbornest soul in 3 counties, she said, a small smile playing on her lips. She didn't look at the house with confusion, but with an intense curiosity. I have a plan, Elias said, his standard reply, but with her, it felt different. She nodded, her gaze following the line of the stone chimney he was building. It's a big chimney. It has to be, he said. It heats the whole house. All from one fire? She asked, her brow furrowed. The heat rises, he explained, finding himself willing to say more to her than he had to anyone else. It warms the stones on this level. Then the smoke and heat go up and warm the stones on the next level. The whole chimney becomes a radiator. She considered this, her eyes bright. That's clever. No one had ever called his work clever. They called it foolish, wasteful, insane. Her simple validation was more fortifying than Mrs. Gable's bread. Clara started coming every few days, sometimes with a small offering of food, sometimes just to watch him work. She'd sit on a log with Boro, who had taken to her immediately, resting his head in her lap. She asked questions about the joinery, about the angle of the roof, about the strange ventilation shafts he was building into the walls. He answered her in his quiet, declarative way, and he could see her piecing the logic together in her mind. She was the only one who seemed to be trying to read the same book he was. He finished the 3rd and final level in the last week of November, just as the first flurries of snow began to drift down from a sky the color of slate. This level was smaller still, 20 by 22 feet, a cozy insulated box that would be his sleeping quarters. From the ground, the house looked utterly bizarre. A stack of 3 wooden blocks, each one smaller than the last, clinging to the hillside. The staircase effect was undeniable. The children in the village had taken to calling it Elias's Folly. He moved his few belongings from his father's old cabin, the journal, a cast-iron pot, 2 wool blankets, his father's tools. He split and stacked the last of the firewood, filling the vast storage space on the lowest level until it was overflowing. The cold cellar was stocked with potatoes, carrots, and jars of preserved beans. He had done everything the journal had instructed. He had worked until his body screamed for rest, and then he had worked some more. The first real snow came, a heavy, wet blanket that fell for 2 days straight. Elias watched from the large window of his second-floor living space. The snow accumulated on the lower roof. Then, just as the journal predicted, it reached a critical weight and slid off with a soft whoosh, piling in harmless drifts on the ground below. He built a fire in the great stone hearth. The draft was perfect. The stone began to radiate a deep, steady warmth. Boro lay stretched out on the wooden floor, sighing with a contentment he hadn't shown in the drafty old cabin. Elias took a thermometer, one of his father's scientific instruments, and checked the temperatures. The lowest level, the workshop, was a frigid 34 degrees. He climbed the internal staircase to the second level, the living area. The thermometer registered 43 degrees, a 9-degree difference. He held his breath and climbed the final set of stairs to the small, sleeping loft. He waited for the mercury to settle, 52 degrees, another 9-degree difference. It was working. The principle was sound. He sat on the edge of his cot, a slow smile spreading across his face. It would work. It was his home. The valley settled into the hard grip of winter. The cold was a physical presence, a predator that stalked the edges of the forest and pressed against the walls of every home. The snows came and went, each storm laying down another layer of white until the landscape was a smooth, featureless expanse. For the people in the valley, it was a season of struggle, of endless wood chopping and huddling close to insufficient fires. For Elias, it was a season of quiet vindication. His days took on a new, peaceful rhythm. In the mornings, he would descend to the cold workshop on the first level to repair a tool or carve a piece of wood, his breath pluming in the air. The cold kept him focused and alert. For lunch, he would climb to the second level, into the comfortable warmth of the living space. The great stone hearth was the center of his world, a constant source of radiant heat. The fire he banked at night was always still a bed of glowing coals in the morning. His woodpile on the first floor seemed barely diminished. The efficiency of the design was even greater than his father's calculations had predicted. The vast insulated space below acted as a buffer, preventing the ground's chill from leaching into the living quarters. In the evenings, he and Boro would sit in the living area. Elias would read from his father's journal, not for instruction anymore, but for companionship, for the quiet presence of the man he barely remembered. He would look out the large south-facing window at the snow-covered valley, at the distant lights of other cabins where he knew people were fighting a losing battle against the cold. The sleeping loft above was always warm, a cozy nest that gathered all the rising heat from the day. He slept better than he ever had in his life. Mr. Abernathy saw him in the village one afternoon when he went for supplies. The old farmer looked worn, his face chapped raw by the wind. "Still alive up there in that icebox of yours, boy?" he asked, though the question lacked its earlier mockery. It was replaced by a grudging curiosity. "I'm warm," Elias said simply. Burning through all that wood you spent the summer cutting, I imagine. You'll be out by February." It was a statement of fact, a law of winter as Abernathy knew it. "I have enough," Elias said. He bought his flour and salt from Mrs. Gable, who looked at him with worried eyes. "You look well, Elias," she said, as if surprised. "You're not cold?" "No, ma'am. The house is warm." His words, spare as they were, became a source of rumor and speculation in the valley. The idea of Elias being warm in his folly was as strange and unnatural as a river flowing uphill. It was dismissed as youthful bravado, a boy too proud to admit his own foolishness. Clara was the only one who seemed to believe him. She made the difficult trek up the hill in mid-January, her cheeks flushed red from the cold. Boro greeted her with a happy bark, his tail thumping against the door frame. Elias ushered her inside, into the second-level living space. She stopped just inside the door, her eyes wide. She unwound the scarf from her neck. "Elias," she breathed, a small cloud of vapor escaping her lips and immediately vanishing into the warm air. It's truly warm in here." She walked toward the hearth, holding her hands out not to chase away a chill, but simply to feel the deep, penetrating heat radiating from the stone. "Our cabin is so drafty. Father and I spend all our time huddled in one room, wrapped in blankets. We burn twice the wood we did last year, and we're still always cold." He poured her a cup of hot tea. She sat at his small, handmade table, looking around the room. It was simple, functional, but it felt like a true sanctuary. "You did it," she said, looking at him with an expression of profound respect. "Everything you said you would do. You built it." "My father's plan was a good one," he said, deflecting the praise. "It was," she agreed, "but you were the one who swung the axe. You were the one who lifted the stones. And you were the one who listened when everyone else was laughing." Her visit was a small, warm spot in the heart of the long winter. But the season was not yet done with the valley. The old-timers like Abernathy had been right about one thing. It was a killer winter. The worst was yet to come. In early February, the sky turned a strange, bruised purple. The wind died down completely, creating an unnerving silence. Boro became restless, pacing the cabin and whining low in his throat. Elias stepped out onto the sheltered porch on the second level. The air was so cold it felt sharp, like tiny needles against his skin. He looked at the thermometer he had hung outside. It was 10 degrees below zero, and the sun hadn't even set. The journal had a section on weather signs. "Beware the quiet cold," his father had written. "The storm that follows a great silence is the one that will break you." He spent the rest of the day securing the cabin. He checked the storm shutters, brought in an extra load of firewood from the first level, and ensured the chimney flue was clear. The first flakes began to fall at twilight, small and dry, skittering across the frozen crust of the old snow. By nightfall, a howling gale descended on the valley. It was a blizzard of unprecedented fury. The wind shrieked like a living thing, tearing at the stout little cabin. The snow didn't fall so much as it flew horizontally, a blinding white torrent that erased the world. Inside, Elias and Boro were safe. The cabin was a fortress. It didn't groan or shudder. The thick log walls, chinked with moss and clay, muffled the storm's rage to a distant roar. The fire in the hearth burned steadily, its draft unaffected by the tempest outside. Elias kept his vigil, moving through the 3 levels of his home. The temperature differential held, a deep, stable cold in the workshop, a comfortable warmth in the living area, and a cozy heat in the sleeping loft. The structure was performing exactly as it was designed to. It was a ship sailing through a sea of white fury. The storm raged for 2 full days. The snow piled in immense drifts, burying fences, swallowing sheds, and climbing the walls of the valley's cabins. On the morning of the 3rd day, the wind finally abated. The silence that returned was profound, broken only by the soft hiss of the fire. Elias opened the door and was met by a solid wall of white. The snow was drifted clear up to the eaves of the second level, but his door, set back on its porch, was clear. He was not trapped. He put on his snowshoes and climbed out the window, Boro leaping happily into the deep powder behind him. The world was transformed. It was a landscape of alien beauty and immense danger. The tops of the tallest pines were heavy with snow. The familiar contours of the valley were gone, replaced by smooth, rolling dunes of white. He could see no smoke from any of the other chimneys. A deep sense of unease settled over him. He was checking on Samson in the small, sturdy lean-to he had built against the first level when he heard a muffled shout. He turned, scanning the white emptiness. He saw a figure struggling through a massive drift, a dark shape against the blinding snow. As the figure drew closer, he recognized the exhausted, shambling form of Mr. Abernathy. Abernathy was covered in snow, his face pale with cold and exhaustion. He collapsed against the cabin wall, breathing in ragged gasps. "Elias," he wheezed, My roof, the weight of the snow." Elias helped the old man inside, sitting him down by the fire. He removed his frozen coat and wrapped him in a wool blanket. He gave him a hot cup of broth, which Abernathy drank with trembling hands. When he could finally speak, his voice was a broken whisper. It just gave way, a great crack, and then the whole north side of the roof came down. Snow filled the room. We were lucky to get out. Clara, she's at the Gables. Their roof is holding for now, but their chimney is blocked. They can't get a fire going." He looked around the warm, bright room, his eyes filled with a dawning, shattering disbelief. "How is this possible? There's no drafts. It's warmer in here than my house is in September." Elias didn't say a word. He just added another log to the fire. There was nothing to say. The cabin spoke for itself. Before noon, another group arrived. It was Mr. Gable, his wife, and Clara, their faces grim. "Our chimney is completely buried," Mr. Gable announced, his voice hollow. "We can't clear it. It's freezing in the store. We saw Abernathy's tracks and hoped." "Come in," Elias said. "There's room." He led them inside, making space for them by the fire. Clara met his eyes, and in her gaze he saw not just relief, but a deep, knowing affirmation. She had believed, and she had been right. The final arrival was the most unexpected. Late in the afternoon, a floundering party led by a freezing Mr. Carver appeared. The mill owner's grand house, with its modern stove and large glass windows, had been its undoing. The windows had burst from the pressure of the drifts, and the stove was no match for the invading cold. His wife was weeping, his children shivering. Carver, the man who had called Elias's home a monument to folly, now stood on its threshold, begging for shelter. His pride was gone, frozen out of him. "Please, son," he stammered, his teeth chattering. "We'll freeze. We have nowhere else to go." Elias just nodded and stepped aside, letting them pass into the warmth. That night, the staircase cabin became an ark. Abernathy and the Gables took the sleeping loft. The Carvers huddled in a corner of the main living area. Elias and Clara sat by the hearth, Boro sleeping between them. The cabin held them all. The different levels gave the families a measure of space and privacy. The great stone hearth, the heart of the home, radiated its life-giving warmth, and the stores of food and firewood on the lowest level seemed endless. In the quiet of the night, with the blizzard survivors sleeping around them, Mr. Abernathy came down from the loft. He stood before the fire, looking not at the flames, but at Elias. The old farmer's face, illuminated by the firelight, was a mask of humility and awe. "I was wrong," Abernathy said, his voice thick with emotion. "I'm an old man, and I thought I knew everything there was to know about winter in this valley. I called you a fool, but I was the fool." He looked around the warm, sturdy room. "This isn't a folly, son. This is the smartest built house I've ever set foot in. You saved us. Your plan saved us all." Elias simply nodded. He looked at Clara, who gave him a small, proud smile. That was all the vindication he needed. The laughter had finally fallen silent, replaced by the quiet crackle of the fire in a home that had become a haven. The great blizzard of that year became the new calendar for the valley, a point from which all time was measured, before the storm and after. When the thaw finally came and the people could return to their broken homes, something fundamental had shifted. The laughter aimed at Elias's folly was gone, replaced by a quiet, reverent curiosity. That spring, they came to him not with warnings, but with questions. Mr. Abernathy was the first, hat in his hand, his pride replaced by a student's humility. "Elias," he'd said, standing on the now dry ground before the strange, tiered cabin, "would you teach me?" Elias didn't have the words for teaching. He wasn't a man of lectures or long explanations, so he brought out his father's journal, its pages worn soft with use, and opened it on the porch table. Together, he and Abernathy studied the precise drawings, the elegant calculations, the theories of stratified heat. Abernathy, a man who had built a dozen conventional cabins in his life, traced the lines with a calloused finger, marveling at the simple, profound logic he had once dismissed out of hand. Others followed. Mr. Carver, whose grand house had to be almost entirely rebuilt, came to offer Elias any timber he wanted from the mill, free of charge. It was his form of an apology. Elias took only what he needed to build a larger table. Mr. Gable came to understand the principles of the central stone flue. Soon, Elias's home was a regular gathering place for the men of the valley. He would speak little, letting the journal do the talking. He would point to a diagram, demonstrate a notching technique, show them how to mix the clay and moss for the chinking. He proved once again that his actions were his language. That summer, a new kind of construction began in the valley. On the slope across from his, Abernathy started his own staircase cabin, with Elias helping him raise the first beams. Its footprint was smaller, adapted to his own needs, but the principle was the same. Carver rebuilt his home not as it was, but in the new style, a testament to his conversion. The valley began to transform, one tiered cabin at a time. The structures, once seen as bizarre, were now symbols of wisdom and survival. Elias and Clara were married the following autumn, in a simple ceremony on the wide porch of the second level. The entire valley attended. Mr. Abernathy gave her away, his eyes shining with pride. Borrow served as the silent, dignified witness lying at Elias's feet. Their life together settled into the same quiet, steady rhythm as the seasons. They had 2 children, a boy and a girl, who grew up exploring the different levels of the remarkable house, understanding its warmth and safety as the most natural thing in the world. Years passed. The valley prospered. The staircase cabins proved themselves again and again through harsh winters and heavy snows. They were warmer, safer, and required far less firewood than the old box cabins. The knowledge from his father's journal, once a solitary secret, had become the valley's common wisdom, passed from one builder to the next. Elias was no longer the strange boy on the hill. He was a respected elder, a man whose quiet certainty had reshaped their entire way of life. Boro grew old. His great shaggy coat became flecked with gray, his movements slow and deliberate. He spent most of his days sleeping by the great stone hearth that had been the center of his world for so long. One cold winter evening, as the family sat together in the warm glow of the fire, the old dog rested his head on Elias's lap and gave a deep, contented sigh, and then was still. His passing was peaceful, a quiet end to a long and loyal life. Elias carried his old friend in his arms the next morning. The weight felt familiar and final. He buried Boro on the small hill behind the cabin, in a spot that overlooked the entire valley, now dotted with the tiered roofs of the houses he had inspired. He carved a simple marker from a piece of oak. Boro, a good dog, a faithful witness. He stood there for a long time, his hand on the smooth wood, alone with the memory of the one creature who had never doubted him, not for a moment. More time flowed by, a river carving its path through the landscape of their lives. Elias's children grew up and had children of their own. He taught his grandchildren how to read the weather in the clouds, how to choose the right tree for a beam, how to lay a stone so it would hold for a century. He showed them their great-grandfather's journal, explaining the beautiful, simple science within its pages. He and Clara grew old together, their love a quiet, steady thing like the pilot light of a lamp. Her hair turned the color of snow, and his hands, though still strong, were mapped with the wrinkles of 1,000 seasons of work. He never lost his quiet nature. He remained a man of few words, content to sit on his porch and watch the valley thrive. He saw the fruits of his stubborn labor, not just in the unique roof lines that defined the landscape, but in the faces of the children who grew up without the constant, gnawing fear of the winter cold. He had not just built a house, he had built a future. One morning in his 87th year, Elias did not come down from the sleeping loft. Clara went up to check on him and found him in his bed, a peaceful expression on his face, having passed away in the night in the warmest room of the house he had built with his own 2 hands. The whole valley turned out for his funeral. They buried him on the hill next to Boro, under the shade of a tall pine. They placed a simple fieldstone at the head of his grave, one taken from the same creek where he had gathered the stones for his hearth. Mr. Abernathy's grandson, a skilled stonemason, carved the epitaph. It didn't mention his name or the dates of his life. It said only, "He listened to the wind and the wood. He taught us how to build a home." Decades later, long after everyone who had known him was gone, the story was still told. The tale of the quiet, orphan boy who built a house like a staircase, and how the neighbors all laughed. They told it to their children on cold winter nights, huddled in the warmth of their own tiered homes. They would point to the original cabin, still standing proud and strong on the high meadow, a dark, solid shape against the snow. It was no longer a folly or a curiosity. It was a monument, a landmark. It was the first, the one that had shown them the way, and they would explain how each level was warmer than the one below, a simple, elegant truth that had saved their ancestors. The house stood as a silent testament to the enduring power of unconventional wisdom, the strength of quiet persistence, and the profound legacy of a man who spoke not with his voice, but with his hands, building a shelter that became a home for them all.